Welcome to Yesterday, Today, Tomorrow. My name is Mariana Cordier, and I am your host. A trailblazer is a pioneer, somebody who's willing to take risks and go in a path that isn't already there. They blaze a trail and leave a path for others. My guests today are trailblazers in Montgomery County and the state of Maryland. Nancy Navarro is on the Montgomery County Council and is the past president of the council. Valerie Ervin served on Montgomery County Council and ran as a gubernatorial primary candidate for Maryland in 2018. Welcome, ladies.
Great to be here.
I appreciate you having here. I'm honored. You guys have, between the two of you, so much experience, so much to tell us. So why don't we start with you, Nancy? How did you start in contemplating a political career?
I think I started contemplating my political career before I understood or even knew that I was contemplating it, right? I think it all started when my daughter, Anais, began kindergarten, and I began to get involved to try to understand and navigate the school system, and pretty soon realized that there were a lot of things I did not know, and I needed to explore. But then I started also thinking a lot about what happens to children before they enter kindergarten. And so this notion of childcare is something that I had to experience personally as a challenge. All of that kind of came together, and I began to work as an advocate and then as a founder of a nonprofit organization to address some of these issues. But, you know, pretty soon I realized that that was not the place that I wanted to be, because I really wanted to affect change at the decision-making table. So I started getting a little bit antsy about that.
What was the county like at that point in time?
Well, the county at that point in time was already a very diverse county. I mean, if we look at, for example, the influx and the growth of the Latino community, the boom started in the 80s. So, you know, at that particular time, and we're talking, for me, 1997, all through the beginning of around 2001 or 2 is when I also was working really hard with a nonprofit. So I could see the change. I knew the change. I felt the change. I was out there working in the community. I understood what was happening. But it seemed like a lot of the leadership in county government and the administration were not so aware, you know, and I was told things like, you're ahead of your time, when I was trying to advocate for example, for Latino women to become childcare providers and to get their support. I was told you're ahead of your time, but I could see and I knew and I understood. But it actually all came to be when I decided to co-host a coffee for somebody that was running for a Board of Education. And I had never done anything like this in my life. And it was Valerie Ervin, who I had met.
Oh my goodness, and she's here.
She's here. But I had met her because she was chief of staff on the council, and I was advocating for resources. And she would frame and articulate things in ways that really resonated with what I was experiencing on the ground. So during, you know, when she decided to run for the Board of Education, I was reading the Gazette and I was like, oh, I know her. Hey, let's do something for her. Coincidentally, the person that was serving on the Board of Education for my district, I had just moved to Colesville, resigned. Oh. And literally during that coffee, she turned to me and said, oh my God, like, this is your district. You need to run. And there began what a lot of women do, which is, oh, me? Are you kidding me? No, I don't know anything about politics or running, or I'm not qualified for that. I don't, you know, your self-doubt just kicks in.
Sure. Well, and so let's ask Valerie. So in that time frame, you decided to run for Board of Education. What were you doing up to that point, and what made you decide to actually be one of the first to run?
It was interesting hearing that story from Nancy's perspective, but I came to the county in the 80s, in 1987, but I didn't really engage in the county because I was a union organizer, so I was on the road all the time. But I decided when my son was 7, my youngest son turned 7, I needed to, you know, stick close to home. And that was the year that I started paying really close attention to what was going on in his elementary school. And lots of women get their political kind of chops in PTA. which is how
it's a tough group.
It's a really, let me tell you something.
And at that time, the Board of Education, for those of us who weren't as familiar or whatever, were all men. Is that correct?
They weren't all men.
No?
There were a few women.
Oh, okay.
But the Montgomery County Board of Education was a really important institution in this county. And so I got really engaged in PTA, got very politicized around tracking African American and Latino kids in schools, and people think that didn't happen in Montgomery County. It was a big deal. And so because I was used to organizing on the ground in my job, it just became very natural for me to sort of say, let's just start talking with people like me who are women of color who have children in the school system about what they're experiencing. Lo and behold, this woman sitting across from me walks into the office of the council member that I was working for, George Leventhal, and she was running a very important nonprofit at the time, and they were ahead of their time because they were training Latino women to become child care providers. First time in the county, I think, that anything like that was even, you know, discussed as something real. And so we sparked because we were, you know, on opposite sides of the same coin, saying to ourselves, there is something here that needs to be addressed, and no one was addressing it.
And so how did you guys feel about your experience running? Who wants to go first?
Well, it's funny because I think for the Board of Education, they were obviously the experience was different because I was running for an appointment, whereas Valerie was running, you know, as a campaign for an elected seat. But most certainly, and I think that we don't celebrate this as much. You know, Valerie was a true mentor to me, right? I mean, literally, you know, hey, we got to go here, 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 have these meetings, do this and do that. But to be honest, it seemed like, at least in my case, there was already pretty much a done deal, you know, candidate that had been selected. And so when I showed up and filled the room with a cross section of the community, so, you know, because I had African American support, I had Asian support, I had Latino support, I had, you know, and they had to move the interview from the little conference room to the big hearing room of the board. And then the vote went down and I won. And interestingly enough, I think the then president of the board said, "Oh, what an interesting turn of events," I quote, because it had already been kind of set. And so I just kind of came in and it was a little bit of a shock. But I had all this support from a cross section of the community, really wanting that voice to be represented. So that experience in 2004 for me was a little bit different because it was, you know, it was an appointment. And if Valerie can share.
How did it feel, Valerie, for running? I mean,
well,
did you have a lot of support?
First of all, let's just be real about this. I never intended to run. Oh. And it was a situation where I felt like if I didn't do it, then we were going to have to wait a really long time for someone who looked like me, talked like me, thought like me,
to step up,
was going to do it.
Right.
So I just decided with some friends of mine that we were just going to take this on. We had no idea what we were doing. But we ended up running this campaign a lot of the friends of mine who helped me in this race were union organizers who were used to door knocking. So we started something very different and unique, and that was we knocked on 10,000 doors.
So
and
you
that
started
really,
a grassroots
Yeah, it was a grassroots campaign throughout the county, and there's a weird thing here in Montgomery County. There are two kinds of cycles you can run on a school board. One is a year-long cycle, and I was dumb enough to pick that one. So I ended up having a year-long campaign. It was a very crowded field. And so we won.
That's awesome.
And as soon as I won, Nancy got the appointment. But she failed to say the story behind that. And I think this is really important for women who are watching the show, is that, you know, you have to learn how to break in. And we did that.
Well, so, that's what's so important about the show. It's about the fact that you guys forged a path that had not been forged before.
Yeah, well, the teachers union got behind Nancy, and that was like a behind the scene situation that no one really knew about, and without that support, it would have been very difficult for her to get that appointment.
Right, and I think that's what I was referring to in terms of, you know, Valerie understood and knew a lot of those nuts and bolts of getting elected. You know, I mean, I'm not from this country. I mean, I was born and raised in a different country. And so I was kind of like learning all of this very quickly, right? It's not like I grew up in this system.
No, right.
And so it was very important to understand that these are very critical steps, such as, hey, teachers union is so important in terms of support. But I had to go in there and make my case. You know, I had to go in there and explain, listen, this is what I'm seeing out there. This is the growth that we are seeing in these particular communities. We understand that, you know, African-American students, you know, Black students and Latino students look at the growth that is projected and look at these gaps. And so I had to make my case and also be able to basically, you know, make the point and convince them that I was electable, because this was a long haul. You know, it was an appointment, but then I had to run for re-election in 2006.
Yeah.
And they needed to know that I was serious
that
and that I had a platform and that my platform made sense. So that was really pivotal, and it was very critical.
And I think one other really important thing is Nancy doesn't give herself enough credit for this, but to be good at being a politician is you have to know how to tell a story. And she has this skill about a narrative. And she was able to tell the story about, this is the Montgomery County I know. And you're going to know it soon, too. But
Yes.
she was able to, you know, be really elegant about it, but at the same time, she's very powerful. And so I think what really made us different was we took politics in a different direction than most people had ever seen. And so I think it's something that people still try to emulate, but like I think a lot of it is just finding the right people who are excited about doing. You don't do what we've done if you're not really excited and committed to it, because it becomes
And have a good message.
all of your. It's all. I believe in story.
Yeah.
And
that
if you
sounds
can tell a story about who you are, it's hard for me to believe that Spanish was Nancy's first language. I struggle with the English language, and she can go between
forth.
languages, and I watch that with awe.
So you guys went from Board of Education to the County Council. How did that happen? Was that somewhat the same as how you ended up on the board?
Well, my story is Tom Perez, who is now the chair of the National Democratic Party, was a council member from District 5, lives in Tacoma Park. And he decided he was going to run for Attorney General that year. And I was working at the council as a chief of staff, and one day he walked across the hall, and this is such a great story for people. It's like relationships matter. And he said, I'm going to not run for re-election, and my seat will be open, and I think you should run.
That's awesome.
But of course, I did what Nancy did, and I go, oh, not me. I can't run for the council. I just want, you know. So I decided to go to the Board of Elections on the last day that you could, you know, go register as a candidate by myself at like 10 minutes to 5.
And you registered.
And I registered.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So what was it about the County Council that made you want to run?
I fell in love with the council as an institution. I worked 4 years as the chief of staff. I got to learn the inside workings and dealings of the council, like how legislation was written and worked on and passed, and how important policy is, and how fun that can be if you do it the right way. So I just became devoted to the work of the council.
Gotcha.
And decided that since I had that experience, and then I was also on the Board of Education, that this was the next step that I should take.
What about you, Nancy?
Well, interestingly enough, very soon when I joined the Board of Education, so I was reelected in 2006, I became president. But I always understood that the work of in education and how to best support our students in achievement, there were so many other policy areas that influenced that. So whether it was access to housing or access to healthcare, or amenities where they lived, or poverty issues, and these were things that were the purview of the council. So while I was on the board, I was constantly also connecting all of those dots. And so in my case, it was a real sad situation. The long time, serving member that represented District 4, Marilyn Preisner, she passed away. And it was interesting because we used to have these lunches, especially when I was president of the board and she was president of the council. And in many ways, she was really grooming me. I didn't realize that, but she was sharing a lot of interesting, details about the district and things of that nature. And I think she was kind of testing, like, maybe one day you would do that. But then she passed away, and in 2008, and I realized, whoa, okay, this is now that opportunity then to serve on the council, where you are going to then deal with not just education in terms of funding, but all those other issues.
It sounds a reoccurring theme that keeps coming up that you guys keep mentioning. It strikes me is that there were those before you were mentoring you guys who were actually being supportive. Valerie, congratulations for mentoring and encouraging Nancy, and then Nancy, I'm sure you're doing the same for others, and so many have helped you guys. How impactful was that?
I think it's everything, because, and I really believe that women are very good at that, because I think one of the things that we share is that our passion has really been centered around making a difference and really trying to solve problems while telling the story, and telling the story of those who are not necessarily at the table all the time, right? I felt like it was my duty to do that. And so therefore, when I share information or advice, I don't see it from the perspective of, well, I don't know if I want to help you, because if I help you, what if you get ahead? And what if I want to run for the other seat that you want to run for? And that happens all the time.
Right.
And, but I really believe in that understanding of coming from a place of generosity and abundance, because if something is meant to be for you, it will be meant for you, and you will get it. But it's important to be able to share and to be able to, talk about, hey, these are the barriers, and this is the great stuff. You can't just make it all, rosy and everything is just beautiful. So I always appreciated that about Valerie, and I always say it publicly every time I have an opportunity, because it is very important. But don't get me wrong, mentoring, that's not the end all be all.
No.
I mean, you got to put in the work.
Yeah.
You have to know what you're doing. You have to be qualified, because there's nothing worse than somebody coming to you and say, look, I really want to run, I want you to be my mentor, and then that person doesn't even do the work or anything, right?
Right?
So there is that piece as well.
There's always
There's responsibility on both sides.
Yeah, I am just struck right now listening, is that we're in 2020 and Nancy's the only woman on the council.
Right. Well, that was my next question.
Yeah.
Like, there's some obstacles for us to
Oh,
overcome.
the obstacles are extraordinary. I'm the only African-American woman to ever serve on the Montgomery County Council, ever.
And
that is something that we shouldn't be celebrating.
No.
And so that means there's something here. We cracked through the egg, but that's not enough.
No.
So what's going on here? Like, why is this happening? I don't know the answer to that, but in a lot of ways, I feel like when I first got elected was in 2004, we're in 2020, that was 16 years ago. I feel like the county kind of is losing ground, because I see things now that are kind of scare me.
We didn't see those 10, 20 years ago.
No.
No.
And I think a lot of it is what Nancy started out talking about, was how she saw things. And now we talk about this a lot, how we knew that the changes were coming years before they actually hit. So now we're in a county that's majority minority. The school system, what's the percentage of Latino children?
32% or something like that.
That's pretty extraordinary.
Yeah.
And we have an achievement gap here that's getting bigger. It's not closing. And I ran on the achievement gap in 2004, 16 years ago.
So what can we do? What would you tell people thinking about running, or, folks that are interested in what is happening in a county? We don't want to slide backwards. We want to move forward, right?
I think for me, the most important thing is for you to be very committed in making a difference, and not go into these positions, like I said, always kind of with one eye over here and the other one over there, right? That you are committed to the work. I feel like there's just too much interest in figuring out what is that next office before even committing to an agenda that is coherent, that is strategic. And now more than ever. I remember when the 2010 census came out, and I was so excited because it began to really confirm a lot of the things that I had been talking about. So here we are now, and we need to make a decision in the county to accept who we are. I always say it's like we're still suffering from this identity crisis. It's okay that we're a majority, county, majority of color. That's all right. I mean, of the 5 councilmanic districts, 4 are majority of color. You know what? It's an amazing county. It's very strong. Fiscally is very strong. We have to do more work on economic development. But my point is that this change has been occurring for a long time. And a lot of people might theorize that, oh, wait, if it's, too diverse, then things are not going to be that great. That hasn't happened here. But I think that we need to take a step back and say, it's all right that this is who we are. Let's focus on what is it that's going to continue to get us to the next level.
So how do we get the word out?
Well, it's interesting. I like to follow up on what Nancy said, sure, because I work now in Prince George's County, which is a majority community of color, and they're beating us in economic development. And that is, to me, the outgrowth of good leadership. So they're building a cadre of leaders on the ground that are going to sort of, fill this pipeline. Montgomery County needs a pipeline of leaders like that. So Angela Alsobrooks, a woman of color, is leading Prince George's County, and I think she's going to do great things. And I think when I look at my county, I would like to see something like that happen here, but I think there's a lot of fear of anything new that kind of rocks the boat, because that's not how it was, back in the day.
There is a sense of clinging to traditions that are, for lack of a better word, passé. I mean, traditions are great, but hanging on to them instead of moving into the future, being able to pivot and do the things necessary for economic growth, closing the achievement gap, making sure our kids are, future leaders, they're knowledgeable, educated.
But see, I think that goes hand in hand. In my assessment, I think we became complacent because we were Montgomery County. Montgomery County is great. Montgomery County has all these things. And you can't do that. You cannot become complacent, right? And, I saw Angela Alsobrooks yesterday, and I congratulated them on the report on the, job numbers. I think it's great. There are different types of jobs, the jobs we create here, but it's not about a competition. I think that when Prince George's does well, the region does well. When Montgomery County does well, the region does well. But you're right about the fact that we need to take a step back and acknowledge who we are, take stock of the assets that we have, and be very strategic about where we're taking it. We can't be complacent, and I used to give a lot of credit to Rushen Baker because he laid the groundwork. I mean, he paved that path so that now Prince George's County is a major player. Yeah. And that takes a little bit of time. I feel like in this county, we've had these assets, but there needs to be that push and that impetus to say, we're going to leverage these assets. This is the plan. Let's start executing. Let's do this. And so I'm super interested in that. One of my last acts as council president was to put forth a strategic plan, an economic development platform. Because I kept hearing people say, what is the strategic plan, right? What's happening? So I worked on that. But now we all, again, have to acknowledge that it's cool, it's fine, it's great that we are who we are. That's our asset, right? Our kids benefit from going to schools when you have this broad diversity. They graduate. I mean, my daughters are doing that. They graduate, they go on into jobs where they feel super comfortable, traveling the world and doing their work because this is where they grew up. But I feel like we're still, and we're seeing it right now with the boundary studies at the school system, we're still battling.
Well, the boundary issue is amazing. What has
that's nothing
bringing up. It's bringing
well,
up
when
stories.
I was doing PTA work at Blair High School before Blair was built, I was on that boundary committee, and I was like 32 years old. I was young. I went to some boundary committee meetings, and I think they forgot. The white women forgot I was in the room. Oh, wow. And I heard things that made my hair, well, my hair does stand on end, but you know what I'm saying.
Really?
I heard things that were way out there. And so what I want to say is that even though, Nancy is very successful here in Montgomery County as, you know, she was council president, did amazing things, and I left the county and went on and did some other things and ended up running for governor, long story. But the drawbacks that we both face as being the first and the only, there is a story about what the price you pay for that. There is a price to be paid for it.
So in the last 30 seconds, each of you get 10. What do you say to future women, minority women out there who are thinking of running? Run, don't run?
I say run and be fearless about it and learn everything you need to know to be legit.
That's right. I would say that. I would say, you know, prepare yourself, be ready, and go and take it. Run. Run, and if they, what is it, if they don't have a seat for you at the table, bring a folding chair. Like this
I love that. Bring a folding chair.
Do it.
It's important. Okay, well, thank you for joining me, my guests. You guys are fantastic, and thank you to the audience for coming and watching the show. My name is Mariana Cordier, and we'll see you next week.